My wealthy family publicly humiliated me at their lavish dinner, banishing me to the worst table in the restaurant. They had no idea they just put the entire night's bill and their perfect reputation squarely in my hands. The air in L'Etoile was so thick with money you could practically taste it. It tasted like butter, aged wine, and the quiet, suffocating judgment of the 1%. I smoothed down the front of my dress for the 10th time, a simple black sheath I'd bought on sale. It felt like a dollar store Halloween costume compared to the couture armor worn by the other patrons, especially the woman at the head of our table, my mother. Tonight was a celebration. My brother, Alex, the golden child, had just made partner at his law firm. This dinner was ostensibly in his honor, but really it was a victory lap for my parents. It was proof that their investment in the right schools, the right summer camps, the right social circles, had paid off spectacularly. Alex, with his perfect teeth, and his equally perfect wife, Jessica, was the living embodiment of their success. And then there was me, the family's glitch in the matrix, the art school graduate, the freelance graphic designer. In their world, I might as well have been a professional finger painter. "Clara, darling," my mother said, her voice a polished melodic weapon. "So glad you could make it. We almost didn't think you'd be able to get away from your projects." "I wouldn't miss it, Mum," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. The word projects was dripped in condescension, as if my career was just a cute little hobby I indulged in between yoga classes. My father, a man who communicated primarily through disappointed sighs and rustling his newspaper, gave a curt nod. "Alexander, your mother and I were just telling the sommelier about your cases. Impressive stuff. Really making a name for yourself." "Thanks, Dad," Alex beamed, raising his glass of champagne. "To family." "To family," everyone echoed, their glasses clinking together in a delicate, expensive chorus. My own glass, still full, remained on the table. No one seemed to notice. Jessica, my sister-in-law, shot me a look over the rim of her flute. It was a look I knew well, a calculated mix of pity and disdain. She was immaculate, of course. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a chignon so tight it looked like it hurt, and her diamond earrings were probably worth more than my car. "We just put in an offer on a house in the Hampton Heights district," Jessica announced, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Alex's arm. 6 bedrooms. The garden is simply to die for. We'll finally have room when you all come to visit." She paused, her gaze flicking to me again. "Though, Clara, I'm not sure your artistic sensibilities would appreciate the HOA regulations." The subtext was clear. "You don't belong here. You can't afford this. You aren't one of us." I took a sip of water, the ice cubes rattling against the glass. "Sounds lovely, Jessica. I'm sure you'll make it a beautiful home." My voice was even, betraying none of the acid churning in my stomach. I had spent 2 decades perfecting this placid exterior. It was my only defense. The conversation flowed around me, a river of stock portfolios, European travel plans, and the strategic importance of enrolling a 3-year-old in the right preschool. I was an island in the middle of it, silent and eroding with every passing wave of their casual superiority. I tried to jump in once, mentioning a big client I had landed, a well-known tech startup. My father had simply patted my hand. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Alex is taking on the Henderson merger? We're talking 9 figures." And just like that, I was invisible again. I focused on my bread roll, meticulously tearing it into smaller and smaller pieces, arranging them on my side plate like a tiny, pathetic Stonehenge. This was my ritual at these family gatherings. It was either this or scream. Just as the appetizers arrived, a delicate tower of seared scallops that probably cost more than my weekly grocery bill, a ripple of excitement went through the table. Alex straightened his tie, and my mother's smile widened to a near impossible degree. "They're here," she whispered, a thrill in her voice. 2 figures were approaching our table, guided by the maitre d'. I recognized the man instantly from the society pages. Mr. Abernathy, the senior-most partner at Alex's firm. He was a titan of industry, a man whose name was whispered in reverent tones. With him was a woman I assumed was his wife, draped in pearls and a look of regal boredom. My father stood up, his own posture suddenly deferential. "David, so wonderful of you to join us." Mr. Abernathy shook his hand warmly. "Wouldn't miss celebrating your boy's success. He's a real shark, this one." Alex puffed out his chest. Introductions were made. Hands were shaken. Beaming smiles were exchanged. It was a nauseating ballet of networking and power playing, and I was just part of the scenery. But then a problem arose. A logistical hiccup in their perfect evening. The maitre d' leaned in, whispering apologetically to my father. Monsieur, my apologies, but we were under the impression it was a reservation for 6. We have no other chairs that can fit at this table. Panic flickered in my mother's eyes. The cardinal sin, appearing unprepared in front of the Abernethys. The table was a large circular booth, and it was indeed full. For a moment everyone just stood there, the awkwardness hanging in the air, thick and heavy. Then Jessica's eyes lit up with a horrific sort of brilliance. She had found a solution. Her gaze slid past the Abernethys, past the opulent floral centerpiece, and landed squarely on me. "Oh, it's no problem at all," she said, her voice as sweet as poison. She gestured with a delicate flick of her wrist towards a small, lonely 2-person table tucked away near the swinging doors of the kitchen. It was the worst table in the house, a place for social outcasts and walk-ins. "Clara won't mind, will you?" I stared at her, my mind blank with shock. "What?" She gave me that pitying smile again, the one that made my blood run cold. She leaned in as if sharing a secret, but her voice was loud enough for everyone, including the Abernethys, to hear clearly. "Don't be difficult, Clara. This is an important night for Alex." She straightened up, her gaze sweeping over the main table, at her husband, my parents, and their esteemed guests. Her voice dropped, becoming firm and dismissive, a queen banishing a court jester. "This table is for family." The words hung in the air, glittering and sharp as shattered glass. "This table is for family," and the unspoken addendum, "and you are not." For a long, stretched-out moment the entire restaurant seemed to go silent, the clinking of cutlery, the low murmur of conversation, the distant swell of a celloet, all faded away, leaving only the deafening hum of my own blood rushing in my ears. I looked at their faces, searching, pleading for one of them to object, to say it was a joke, a terrible, tasteless mistake. My mother offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod to Jessica, a silent seal of approval. She then turned to Mrs. Abernethy with a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Children," she sighed theatrically. "Always so much drama." My father suddenly found a microscopic speck of lint on his suit jacket to be the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. And Alex, my brother, he just winced. A pathetic little flinch of discomfort before smoothing his features back into the bland, handsome mask of a man who knows which side his bread is buttered on. He wouldn't risk his big night, his big moment, for me. Of course he wouldn't. No one was coming to save me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a verdict. A strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes after the initial shock of a deep wound. The pain was there, a roaring fire in my chest, but on the surface, I was ice. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. I picked up my small clutch bag from the velvet seat beside me. The maitre d', a man whose face was a perfect mask of professional horror, rushed forward. "Mademoiselle, please." "It's quite all right," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I looked directly at Jessica, at my mother, at the whole curated tableau of their perfect family. "Jessica is right. This is an important night. We shouldn't keep Mr. and Mrs. Abernethy waiting." I turned and began the long walk to the reject table by the kitchen. It felt like miles. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to follow me, their gazes like tiny pinpricks on my skin. I could feel their whispers, their pity, their morbid curiosity. I kept my chin up, my back straight, focusing on the rhythmic swing of the kitchen doors ahead. In, out, a constant chaotic pulse. When I reached the tiny table, the maitre d' pulled out the chair with a flourish of apology. "A complimentary bottle of our finest champagne for you, mademoiselle, with our deepest regrets for the confusion." "Thank you," I said, sitting down. I didn't want their champagne. I didn't want anything. I just wanted to disappear. From my new vantage point, I had a perfect panoramic view of my family fawning over their guests. They had absorbed the Abernethys into their circle seamlessly, closing the gap where I had been sitting. It was like I had never been there at all. They laughed, they toasted, they leaned in to whisper important-sounding things. They were a portrait of success, and I was the smudge on the glass, now wiped clean away. A new waiter appeared at my elbow. He was young, maybe my age, with kind eyes that held a flicker of genuine sympathy. He wasn't one of the senior staff who orbited the main dining room. He was a satellite, just like me. "Can I get you something to start with, ma'am?" he asked softly. "A double scotch." "Neat," I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. He nodded, not batting an eye. "Right away." When he returned with the drink, he also placed a small, exquisite plate in front of me. It was a single perfect oyster with a dollop of caviar. "From the kitchen," he said, giving me a small conspiratorial smile. Sometimes the best seats get the best service. It was a tiny kindness, but it felt monumental. It was the first human decency I had been shown all night. I took a long sip of the scotch, the burn a welcome distraction. And as I watched my family, the deep, gut-wrenching hurt began to cool, to harden into something else. It crystallized into a cold, sharp-edged clarity. For my entire life, I had been trying to earn my place at that table, contorting myself into a shape they might find acceptable. I had muted my passions, downplayed my successes, swallowed their insults, all for a few crumbs of their approval. And for what? To be cast aside the moment someone more important showed up? To be told, in front of everyone, that I wasn't really one of them? The lie I had been telling myself my whole life, that one day they would see me, that one day I would be enough crumbled into dust. They would never see me, because they didn't want to. I finished my scotch and motioned for the waiter. He came over immediately, his expression still gentle. I was going to ask for the check, just for my drink, and then walk out of that restaurant and their lives forever. But before I could speak, he leaned in closer, his brow furrowed with a professional yet urgent concern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "forgive me, but I've just been reviewing the details for the evening, and there seems to be a situation with the main reservation." He glanced over his shoulder at the laughing, oblivious group at the big table. "A situation?" I asked, my curiosity piqued despite myself. He lowered his voice even more, his eyes locking onto mine. "The booking for the entire party, the table for family," he said, a hint of irony in his tone. "The name it's under is Clara Dubois, and the credit card on file, the one required for the deposit and to cover the entire evening's expenses. It's also yours." The waiter's words didn't compute at first. They floated in the air around me, nonsensical, like a sentence in a language I didn't speak. Clara Dubois. My name. My card. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to connect the dots. A memory, hazy and insignificant at the time, surfaced from the depths of my brain. It was from about a month ago. A phone call from my mother. She had been in one of her rare, effusive moods. "Clara, darling, I'm trying to book Alex's celebration at L'Etoile, but their online system is just impossible, and they're asking for a massive deposit to hold a table for 6 on a Saturday." She'd let out a theatrical sigh. "You're so good with all that computer nonsense. And darling, my main credit card is having some sort of fraud alert issue, can you imagine? Could you possibly just put your card down to hold it? I'll pay you back instantly, of course. It's just to secure the reservation." I remembered agreeing without a second thought. It was a classic mom move. Create a flimsy crisis, layer it with a backhanded compliment about my computer nonsense, and then ask for something. I'd done it automatically, eager for the small scrap of validation, for the feeling of being useful to her. I had typed in my Amex details, secured the table for family, and then promptly forgotten all about it, assuming she had, as promised, switched the payment details to her own card later. She hadn't. The scotch in my stomach turned to a block of ice. The gentle sympathy in the waiter's eyes now held a new meaning. He wasn't just being kind. He was giving me a warning. He was giving me an opening. "Are you certain?" I asked, my voice a dry whisper. He nodded, pulling a small folded printout from his waistcoat pocket and discreetly sliding it across the table. It was a confirmation page. My full name, my email address, and the last 4 digits of my American Express Platinum card. The one I used for business expenses. The one with the ridiculously high limit. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. It felt foreign, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. The humiliation, the hurt, the decades of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. It all coalesced into a single, brilliant point of light. It was rage. Pure, unadulterated, and strangely empowering. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," I said, my voice now smooth as silk. "I appreciate your discretion." "Of course, ma'am," he said, giving a slight bow before retreating. I took a deep breath and sat back in my chair. For the first time all night, I felt completely in control. They had banished me to the losers' table, made me a spectacle, declared me a non-entity. But they had made a critical error. They had left the person they deemed worthless in charge of the bill. It was poetic. It was perfect. I looked over at their table. They had moved on to the main course. My father was holding court, gesturing expansively with a steak knife. My mother was laughing, her head tilted back, pearls gleaming against her throat. Alex and Jessica were listening to Mr. Abernathy with rapt attention, nodding like bobbleheads. They were in their own little world, a world of power and privilege, completely oblivious to the tectonic plates shifting beneath their feet. I motioned for the waiter again. He appeared instantly, a silent and willing co-conspirator. "I'd like to see the wine list," I said. "The reserve list." His eyebrows shot up. "The reserve list, ma'am?" "That's right," I said, my smile widening. "And please send a round of your most expensive champagne over to that table." I gestured with my chin towards my family. "Tell them it's from an anonymous admirer, for their celebration." A flicker of understanding, and perhaps even glee, sparked in his eyes. "Right away, ma'am." He returned moments later with a heavy, leather-bound book that looked like it contained ancient secrets. It did, in a way. Secrets of vintages that cost more than my monthly rent. I flipped through the pages, the names swimming before my eyes. Chateau Margaux, Petrus, Romanée Conti. I didn't know much about wine, but I knew big numbers when I saw them. The champagne arrived at their table. I watched as a different waiter presented the bottle with a flourish. My mother looked confused for a moment, then preened, assuming it was from some other important patron in the restaurant who recognized them. She raised her glass in a general toast to the room, a queen acknowledging her subjects. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a bread knife. I pointed to a line on the page. "I'll have a bottle of this," I told my waiter. It was a 1990 Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon. The price next to it had 4 digits and a comma. "An excellent choice, ma'am," he said, not even trying to hide his grin. "And I think I'm a little hungry after all," I continued. "I'll have the caviar tasting flight, the imperial grade, and the lobster thermidor, and a side of the truffle-infused pommes frites." "Very good, ma'am." As my own extravagant meal began to arrive, course by decadent course, a new kind of energy started to build in me. With every sip of the mind-blowingly expensive wine, with every bite of food that tasted like victory, the years of feeling small and insignificant began to flake away. I was no longer the sad little girl in the corner. I was the benefactor. I was the one in charge. They just didn't know it yet. I watched them order another round of cocktails. Jessica was signaling for the dessert menus. They were settling in, running up a tab that would make a sultan blush, all on my dime. My mother, who once lectured me for an hour about the vulgarity of buying a brand-name handbag, was now sipping a 20-year-old port without a care in the world. The waiter returned to my table, his face a perfect blend of professional poise and shared amusement. He topped up my glass with the last of the wine. "Will there be anything else for you this evening, Miss Dubois?" he asked. I took a final, luxurious sip, letting the complex flavors linger on my tongue. I looked over at the family table, now littered with empty glasses and dessert plates. The Abernathys were getting ready to leave, shaking hands all around. The performance was coming to an end. It was time for the curtain call. "No, thank you," I said, placing my napkin on the table. "I'm finished." I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. "Just bring me the check for the entire party." The waiter's grin was instantaneous and electric. He gave a nod so sharp and precise it could have been a military salute. "It will be my absolute pleasure, Ms. Dubois." He vanished into the bustling ecosystem of the restaurant, leaving me alone with the thrumming in my veins. This wasn't just about revenge, it was a reclamation. I was taking back every holiday I'd felt invisible, every birthday I'd felt like an afterthought, every condescending piece of advice they had ever given me. From my outpost, I watched the Abernathys depart, my family escorting them to the door with a series of obsequious handshakes and air kisses. They floated back to their table, high on the fumes of their own self-importance. They were glowing, triumphant. Alex clapped my father on the back, and Jessica kissed Alex's cheek, leaving a faint smear of pink lipstick. My mother surveyed the scene, her face a mask of serene satisfaction. The mission was accomplished. "Waiter, the check, please," my father boomed, his voice carrying across the dining room. He had a particular way of summoning staff, as if he were calling for a disobedient dog. It always made me cringe. He pulled out his wallet, a well-worn leather affair from which he would produce his black centurion card, with the slow, deliberate gravity of a king revealing his scepter. This was his favorite part of any meal, the casual, ostentatious display of his wealth. I saw my waiter intercept the one my father had hailed. There was a brief, murmured exchange. My waiter nodded, took the check presenter from the other man's hand, and turned. He began the walk toward their table, but he didn't go directly there. He took a slight, deliberate detour. He came to my table first. He placed the leather bill folder in front of me with the reverence of a priest presenting a holy text. He didn't open it. He just set it down and met my gaze. There was a universe of unspoken communication in that look, respect, solidarity, and a shared anticipation of the coming explosion. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. I opened the folder. The number at the bottom was breathtaking. It was absurd. It was glorious. It was the price of a decent used car. The endless rounds of vintage champagne, the multi-course meals, the imported brandies, the Abernathy's orders, my own spite-fueled feast, it all added up to a figure that was both horrifying and exhilarating. I took out my Amex, the very same card they had used to secure their throne, and placed it neatly on top of the bill. My waiter took the folder, and then he walked the 10 feet to my family's table. I watched, holding my breath. My father was already holding his own credit card, ready for the handoff. He looked up, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the delay. He saw the waiter standing there, bill in hand, but his eyes slid right past him to me. He saw me at my little table for one, calmly sipping a glass of water. A crease of confusion formed between his brows. The waiter spoke, his voice perfectly modulated to be audible to the table, but not the entire restaurant. "Sir, there's no need. The bill has been taken care of." My father blinked. Taken care of? By whom? Was it David Abernathy? I'll have to send him a thank you. He started to put his card away, a smug look on his face. Of course, Abernathy had paid. A gesture between men of a certain stature. "No, sir," the waiter said, his expression perfectly neutral. "It was taken care of by Ms. Dubois." And he gestured, just a subtle inclination of his head, in my direction. 6 heads swiveled as one, 6 pairs of eyes, ranging from confused to incredulous to outright hostile, locked onto me. The jovial, celebratory atmosphere at their table evaporated, replaced by a stunned, heavy silence. Jessica's perfectly painted smile faltered. My mother's hand, which had been resting on her pearls, froze. My father's jaw slowly dropped. He found his voice first, a low, dangerous rumble. "Clara? What is this? What have you done?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water before answering. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. "I paid," I said simply, my voice carrying easily in the sudden quiet. "You used my card to book the table, Mom. You just forgot to mention that part." My mother's face went white, then a splotchy, furious red. "That was just to hold the table. You know that. It was a formality." "Was it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "It felt pretty formal when the final bill was charged to my account." Alex, ever the lawyer, jumped in. "Now hold on. This is clearly a mistake. We can sort this out." He looked at the waiter. "You need to reverse the charge on her card and run it on my father's." The waiter didn't even flinch. "I'm sorry, sir. The transaction has been processed and authorized. As per restaurant policy, once a bill is settled, we cannot reverse it. The account holder," he nodded at me again, "authorized the payment. The trap had sprung. They were locked in. The looks on their faces were a chaotic mix of fury and dawning horror. They were realizing that their public humiliation at the hands of the family reject was now complete, but it was Jessica who delivered the next blow, though she didn't intend it for me. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that was still loud enough to be heard by the neighboring tables, who were now pretending not to be watching the unfolding drama with rapt attention. "You let her pay. She probably can't even afford this. Her card is going to be declined. We're all going to be embarrassed." The accusation hung in the air, thick and ugly. That I was poor, that I was trying to pull a stunt I couldn't afford, just to make a scene. It was their default setting, their core belief about me. I just smiled. A calm, serene Cheshire cat smile. I didn't say a word. I just watched them. The waiter, my magnificent, loyal waiter, chose that exact moment to return to their table. He was holding the bill folder again. He didn't present it to my father. He walked around the table and placed it with deliberate care directly in front of me. He opened it for me, revealing the paid receipt and my credit card. And then, in a clear, professional voice that cut through the tension like a knife, he announced the final piece of information, the one detail I hadn't even thought to weaponize. "Ms. Dubois," he said, his eyes twinkling, "your payment was approved without issue. And I've been asked by management to inform you that because the bill exceeded $2,000 on an American Express Platinum card, you're entitled to a complimentary night's stay in our penthouse suite upstairs." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the dumbfounded faces at the other table. "And a bottle of Dom Perignon with our compliments will be waiting for you." The silence that followed the waiter's announcement was profound. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and arrogance out of the family table. A penthouse suite. Dom Perignon. These were the trappings of their world, the rewards they understood, the currency of their success, and it was all being handed to me. The outcast, the charity case, the girl they had just publicly banished. Jessica's jaw was literally hanging open, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish and clownish. Alex looked like he'd been punched in the stomach, all the air knocked out of his celebratory sails. My father's face was a thundercloud of impotent rage, his prized centurion card still clutched in his hand like a useless relic. But it was my mother's expression that I would remember forever. It was a kaleidoscope of shock, fury, and a dawning, horrifying flicker of envy. I hadn't just embarrassed them, I had outplayed them at their own game. I calmly took my card from the folder, tucking it back into my clutch. "That's very kind of you," I said to the waiter, my voice as smooth as the expensive wine I'd just consumed. "Please thank the manager for me. I'd be delighted to accept." "My pleasure, Miss Dubois," he said, with a final, discreet nod. "I'll have the concierge prepare your key." He turned and glided away, his job done, leaving me to face the smoldering wreckage of my family. "A penthouse suite?" my father finally choked out, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Clara, this has gone far enough. This is not a joke. You will cancel this charade, and we will settle this matter properly." "There's nothing to settle, Dad," I said, standing up and smoothing down my sail-rack dress. It suddenly felt like the most powerful garment in the world. "I paid for dinner." A gift for Alex's promotion? I smiled sweetly at my brother, who was still staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. "Congratulations again, Alex. You deserve it." "A gift?" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking the restaurant's refined ambience. Several heads at other tables turned, no longer pretending not to watch. "You call a $2,000 ambush a gift? You did this to humiliate us." "No, Mom," I said, my voice dropping, losing its playful edge and hardening into something cold and final. "You did this to humiliate me. You put me at a table by the kitchen. You announced in front of your important guests that I wasn't family enough to sit with you. You've been doing this my whole life, in 1,000 different ways." I took a step closer to their table, my gaze sweeping over each of their stunned faces. "The only difference is, tonight, you accidentally left me with the checkbook." I turned to leave, my back straight, my head held high. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I half expected my father to stand up, to grab my arm, to make a scene. But they were frozen, trapped in their public cage of shame. They were the ones who cared about appearances, about what people thought. Their hands were tied. As I reached the grand arched exit of the dining room, the maitre d' approached me, a golden key card held delicately between his fingers. "Ms. Dubois, the St. Regis suite is ready for you. Your complimentary champagne is on ice. If there's anything at all you require, please do not hesitate to ask." He was no longer looking at me with pity, but with a newfound profound respect. In their world, money didn't just talk. It roared. And I had just proven I could speak the language fluently. "Thank you," I said, taking the key. I walked out of the dining room without a backward glance. I didn't need to see their faces anymore. I had them memorized. As I crossed the opulent lobby towards the elevators, my phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a text from Alex. "What the hell was that, Clara? You need to call Dad and apologize. Right now." I ignored it. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. I stepped inside, the plush carpeting muffling the sound. Another buzz. My mother. "You have caused an unspeakable embarrassment. We will be discussing your selfish and vindictive behavior. Expect a call in the morning." I smiled and turned my phone to silent. The doors slid shut, encasing me in a bubble of polished brass and quiet solitude. As the elevator ascended, I felt the weight of 2 decades of their judgment begin to lift from my shoulders. It was a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating feeling. I was free. The penthouse was as ridiculous and over-the-top as you could imagine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering panorama of the city lights. A grand piano stood in one corner, and a bottle of Dom Perignon was indeed chilling in a silver bucket next to 2 crystal flutes. It was a palace, a world away from my small, cluttered apartment. I kicked off my shoes, popped the cork on the champagne, sending it flying across the marble floor with a satisfying bang, and took a long swig directly from the bottle. I wandered out onto the private terrace, the cool night air a balm on my flushed skin. The city spread out before me like a carpet of diamonds. Down below, somewhere in that glittering maze, My family was probably sitting in a stunned, furious silence, trying to figure out what had just happened. They thought they had banished me, but they had only promoted me. I took another swig of champagne, a genuine laugh bubbling up from my chest. It felt good. It felt right. I had finally stopped trying to get a seat at their table and had built my own. I stayed out on the terrace for a long time, just breathing, just being. Eventually, I went back inside, my phone still buzzing silently in my bag. I ignored it. I ran a bath in the enormous marble tub, dumping in half a container of expensive bath salts I found in the bathroom. As I soaked, I finally pulled out my phone. There were 17 missed calls, voicemails from my father, each one angrier than the last. A string of increasingly frantic texts from Alex, shifting from demanding an apology to demanding I pay my father back. And then there was one last message, sent just a few minutes ago. It wasn't from any of them. It was from a number I didn't recognize. My heart gave a little jolt. The message was short, and it made the warm water in the tub suddenly feel ice cold. It read, "Ms. Dubois, this is Julian, your waiter from tonight. I hope you're enjoying the suite. I felt I should warn you, your family isn't leaving. They're waiting for you in the lobby, and they have Mr. Abernathy with them." The text message landed like a stone in the placid water of my bath. Mr. Abernathy. They had brought Mr. Abernathy. The champagne-fueled euphoria that had been bubbling in my veins for the last hour instantly fizzled, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. This wasn't just a family meltdown anymore. They had escalated. They had brought in the heavy artillery, the one person whose opinion mattered more to them than anything. My father was a master strategist when it came to social warfare. He knew I could stand up to him, to my mother, to Alex. He knew I didn't care about their anger. But Mr. Abernathy was different. He was an outsider, a powerful, influential man, whose respect my family craved. They weren't just waiting for me in the lobby to yell at me. They were staging a tribunal. They were going to paint me as unstable, childish, and vindictive, in front of the one person who could seriously impact Alex's shiny new career. They were going to turn my victory into a public relations disaster for them, with me as the villain. My first instinct was to hide. To lock the door, turn off the lights, and stay in this marble fortress until they gave up and went home. I could just disappear into the night and deal with the fallout later. But then, another wave of emotion washed over me, stronger than the fear. It was the same cold, clear rage that had propelled me through dinner. I had spent my entire life hiding from their judgment, shrinking myself to avoid their disapproval. Not anymore. If they wanted a confrontation, I would give them one. But it would be on my terms. I climbed out of the tub, wrapping myself in a ridiculously plush hotel robe. I dried off, my mind racing, piecing together a plan. They thought they had me trapped. They thought they could use their most powerful social connection to shame me back into my place. What they didn't understand was that I no longer had a place in their world to be shamed back into. I was off the board, and that made me unpredictable. It made me dangerous. I got dressed, not in my simple black dress, but in the most expensive-looking outfit I could assemble from the hotel's boutique, which I'd called down to have them open. A pair of silk trousers, a crisp blouse, and a pair of heels that made me feel 6 feet tall. I charged it all to the room. My room. I reapplied my makeup, not to hide, but to create a mask of unshakable confidence. By the time I was finished, the woman looking back at me in the mirror was not the timid girl who had been banished to the kitchen table. This was someone else. This was Ms. Dubois. Before leaving the suite, I made one phone call. It was a long shot, a wild card, but if it worked, it would change the entire game. Then, I took a deep breath, downed the last of the champagne in my flute, and headed for the elevator. The ride down felt like a descent into the lion's den. With every floor, I fortified my resolve. They wanted a show? I would give them a masterpiece. The elevator doors opened onto the grand lobby. It was quieter now, the dinner rush over. And there they were, a grim little tableau vivant arranged on a set of velvet couches near the main entrance. My father, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. My mother, sitting ramrod straight, her clutch bag held in a white-knuckled grip. Alex and Jessica, huddled together, whispering furiously. And standing slightly apart from them, looking profoundly uncomfortable, was Mr. Abernathy. He saw me first. His eyes, shrewd and intelligent, widened slightly as I strode towards them, my heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. "Clara," my father snarled, stopping his pacing to block my path. "What is the meaning of this spectacle? You have embarrassed this family in front of Mr. Abernathy." "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice cool and even. I didn't look at him. I looked past him, directly at the man whose presence was supposed to be my undoing. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, extending a hand. "I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this family. Misunderstanding. My name is Clara Dubois. We weren't properly introduced earlier." Mr. Abernathy, a man clearly accustomed to de-escalating tense situations, shook my hand. His grip was firm. "A pleasure, Miss Dubois. Your brother speaks very highly of you." A blatant lie, I was sure, but a polite one. "Clara, stop this nonsense," my mother cut in, her voice shrill. "You will apologize to Mr. Abernathy for your behavior, and you will reimburse your father for this exorbitant bill you so childishly ran up." I turned my head slowly to look at her, a placid smile on my face. Reimburse him? But Mom, Dad didn't pay the bill. I did. With my own money. From my own company. "Your company?" Jessica scoffed from the couch. "You mean your little freelance hobby?" This was it. The moment they would try to discredit me, to paint me as a pathetic, delusional child playing dress-up. "Actually, no," I said, turning my smile on Jessica. "I mean Dubois Designs, LLC. Perhaps you've heard of our biggest client, a tech startup called Synapse." Mr. Abernathy's head snapped towards me. The bored, uncomfortable expression on his face vanished, replaced by one of sharp, intense interest. "You're Clara Dubois from Dubois Designs?" he asked, his voice suddenly filled with a new respect. "You're the one who created the branding package for Synapse?" My heart hammered in my chest. My wild card. My long shot. "Please let this work." "I am," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The logo, the UI/UX design, the entire brand identity. That was my team." Mr. Abernathy stared at me, then a slow smile spread across his face. He let go of my hand and took a step back, looking me up and down as if seeing me for the first time. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, a low chuckle in his voice. "Small world. My firm, specifically my venture capital division, just led the second round of funding for Synapse. We invested $60 million in them 3 weeks ago. Their branding," he said, pointing a finger at me, "was a significant part of the pitch. The investors were incredibly impressed by it. Clean, intuitive, brilliant work. The silence from my family was absolute. It was the sound of 4 minds simultaneously short-circuiting. They had no idea. I had tried to tell them at the dinner table about my new client, but they had cut me off to talk about Alex's 9-figure merger. They had never once shown a genuine interest in the details of my career. To them, I was just Clara, the artist. They had never imagined, not in a million years, that my world might intersect with theirs. You work with Synapse?" Alex stammered, his face a mask of disbelief. "They're my main client," I said simply. Mr. Abernathy was beaming now, looking between me and my stunned family. The power dynamic in the lobby had just shifted so violently it was a wonder the chandeliers didn't sway. I was no longer Alex's embarrassing little sister. I was the design genius behind his firm's new $60 million investment. "Well, this is certainly a surprise," Mr. Abernathy said, his eyes twinkling. He clearly understood exactly what had just happened. He turned to my father. "It seems your daughter is quite the powerhouse in her own right. You must be incredibly proud." My father opened and closed his mouth like a fish, no sound coming out. The checkmate was so total, so absolute, it had rendered him speechless. But Mr. Abernathy wasn't finished. He turned back to me, his expression all business. "Clara, may I call you Clara? I'd love to talk to you more about your work. Perhaps buy you a drink. I have a feeling there are a few other companies in our portfolio that could desperately use your magic touch." The offer hung in the air, a golden apple of opportunity. It was everything I had ever wanted. Recognition, respect, a seat at the table, not their table, but a real one. But as I looked at the shattered expressions on my family's faces, I knew a simple victory wasn't enough. They had tried to utterly demolish me. It was only fair I return the favor. "I'd love to, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I'd never felt before. "But I have a better idea." I paused, letting the moment stretch, making sure I had the absolute attention of every single person in that lobby. "The hotel gave me a complimentary penthouse suite. Why don't we all go upstairs?" The invitation, or perhaps more accurately, the summons, hung in the lobby's cavernous space. Why don't we all go upstairs? It was a suggestion phrased as a question, but it carried the weight of a royal command. My family looked like they'd been slapped. Going upstairs to my suite, the suite I'd won after publicly checkmating them, was the ultimate humiliation. It was forcing them to walk, step by painful step, into the territory of my triumph. Mr. Abernathy, however, looked delighted. The man had a shark's instinct for power dynamics, and he was clearly enjoying the show. "An excellent idea, Clara," he boomed, clapping his hands together. "Lead the way." He gestured grandly towards the elevators, leaving my family with no socially acceptable way to refuse. To decline would be a direct snub to him, their golden goose. They were utterly, beautifully trapped. My father's face was a rigid mask of fury. My mother looked like she had swallowed poison. Jessica shot me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, while Alex just looked lost, like a child whose favorite toy had just been broken. Silently, defeatedly, they fell into line behind me and Mr. Abernathy as we walked to the elevators. The short journey felt like a funeral procession for their pride. The ride up was a masterclass in awkward silence. The only sound was the gentle whir of the elevator and Mr. Abernathy's cheerful humming. I stood at the front, keycard in hand, feeling the force of their combined resentment boring into my back. It no longer intimidated me, it fueled me. I swiped the key and pushed open the door to the St. Regis suite. I stepped aside, allowing them to enter first. The vast, opulent room, with its panoramic city views and the half-empty bottle of Dom Perignon sitting brazenly on the coffee table, was a stark testament to the night's events. It was my victory, quantified in square footage and thread count. "My goodness," Mr. Abernathy said, genuinely impressed as he strode over to the windows. "Quite the view. You certainly have good taste, Clara." "The hotel was very generous," I said, catching my mother's eye as I spoke. A muscle in her jaw twitched. For a few agonizing moments they all just stood there, scattered around the enormous living room like misplaced furniture. My father stared at the grand piano as if he wanted to smash it. Jessica critically examined a piece of modern art on the wall, her lip curled in a sneer. Alex just shoved his hands in his pockets and stared at the floor. I decided to take control. "Please have a seat," I said, gesturing towards the plush sofas. It was the same tone my mother used when she was hosting one of her society fundraisers, gracious on the surface but dripping with condescending power. "Can I offer anyone a drink? I have champagne." That broke the spell. "We don't want a drink, Clara," my father finally bit out, his voice low and menacing. "We want an explanation, and an apology." "An apology for what, exactly?" I asked, pouring a glass of champagne for Mr. Abernathy and one for myself. "For paying for a dinner you invited me to? For having a successful career you knew nothing about? Or for accepting a gift I was offered?" "This isn't about your career," my mother snapped, finally finding her voice. "This is about your appalling behavior, the scene you created. You deliberately tried to make us look bad in front of our guest." Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, taking a sip of his champagne. "Now, Eleanor," he said, his tone mild but firm. "I wouldn't say that. From where I was sitting, it looked like a simple misunderstanding about the bill that got a little spirited. And in the end, he turned and winked at me. It led to a very promising business introduction for me. So, no harm, no foul, as far as I'm concerned." His casual dismissal of their outrage was like dousing their fire with gasoline. They had brought him here as their ultimate weapon, and he had just publicly and unequivocally taken my side. Alex, seeing his career and his parents' social standing crumbling before his eyes, finally stepped forward. He tried to adopt his loyally mediating tone. "Look, Clara, we're all a bit emotional tonight. I think what Mom and Dad are trying to say is that we were hurt that you didn't just talk to us privately." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Privately? Alex, when have any of you ever listened to me privately? Or publicly, for that matter? You threw me out. You literally said, 'This table is for family,' and you pointed to a table by the service door. Did you think I was just going to sit there and meekly eat my bread roll like I always do?" My voice rose, cracking with years of suppressed frustration. "Did you think I would just swallow this one last humiliation and say thank you? Was that the plan?" They had no answer. The raw, ugly truth of what they had done hung in the air, undeniable. "I have spent my entire life trying to be worthy of a seat at your table," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I went to the schools you approved of. I bit my tongue when you mocked my career. I showed up to every mandatory family event and smiled while you ignored me. All I ever wanted was for you to be proud of me, or at the very least, to see me." I took a deep breath, the confession leaving me feeling strangely light. "But tonight, I realized you will never see me. You can't, because you're too busy looking at yourselves, so I'm done. I'm getting my own table." Mr. Abernathy raised his glass. Here," he said quietly. My father looked like he was about to have a stroke. This is what this is about? Some childhood nonsense? You throw away your family over a seating arrangement? No, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I'm not throwing you away. You threw me away first. I'm just finally accepting it. A heavy, funereal silence descended on the room. It felt final. The end of something. I had said it all. I had laid the truth bare, and they had nothing left to fight me with. Their power over me was gone. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, was the first to break. She stood up abruptly. Alex, I have a headache. I want to go home. She wouldn't even look at me. Alex, looking relieved to have an escape route, nodded and began steering her towards the door. My mother stood as well, her face pale and pinched. I have nothing more to say to you, Clara. You have made your position very clear. She walked towards the exit, my father trailing behind her like a deflated balloon. He stopped at the door and turned back, his eyes filled with a baffled fury. You'll regret this, he said, his voice lacking its usual conviction. It sounded weak, pathetic. No, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. I won't. And then they were gone. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only me and Mr. Abernathy in the vast, silent suite. The battle was over. I had won. Mr. Abernathy drained his glass and set it down on the coffee table. Well, he said, a wry smile playing on his lips, that was more entertaining than the opera. You, Clara Dubois, are a force of nature. I was just tired of being treated like a doormat, I said, a wave of exhaustion suddenly washing over me. That's usually how forces of nature get started, he replied. He pulled a business card from his wallet. My private cell. Call me tomorrow. We'll set up a meeting. I wasn't kidding about my other portfolio companies. They need you. Badly. He walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the handle. He turned back, a more serious expression on his face. Just one piece of unsolicited advice, he said. Your family is used to holding all the cards. You just took the whole deck. They won't take that lying down. Watch your back. He left, and I was finally alone. His words echoed in the quiet room. Watch your back. I knew he was right. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning of a new kind of war. I walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. I felt powerful, free, but also deeply, profoundly alone. My phone, which had been silent for the last hour, suddenly buzzed on the table. I picked it up, expecting another angry text, but it was an email notification. The subject line made my blood run cold. It was from my father's primary lawyer. Subject: Cease and desist. Dubois Designs, LLC, trademark infringement. The words on my phone screen seemed to mock the glittering city skyline behind them. Trademark infringement. It was so absurd, so patently false that I almost laughed. My company was my name. Dubois Designs. How could I be infringing on my own name? But then I read the first line of the attached letter, and the icy reality of the situation crashed over me. It has come to our attention that your entity, Dubois Designs LLC, is in violation of the established trademark of the Dubois Family Foundation, a charitable trust established in 1988. The Dubois Family Foundation. It was my father's pet project, a largely defunct charity he'd set up decades ago for tax purposes. It hadn't been active in years, a hollow corporate shell used for shuffling money around. But he had been clever. He had trademarked the family name itself, tying it to his foundation. He was claiming that my design firm, by using our shared surname, was creating brand confusion and illegally profiting from the goodwill and reputation of his dormant charity. It was a classic legal bullying tactic, a frivolous, baseless claim designed to bleed me dry with legal fees until I capitulated. Mr. Abernathy's warning, "Watch your back," rang in my ears. This wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of total war. He couldn't control me emotionally anymore, so he was going to try to destroy me financially. He was going to dismantle the very thing that had given me the power to stand up to him in the first place, my success. For a moment, panic seized me. I was a designer, not a corporate lawyer. I imagined my savings dwindling, my business drowning in depositions and legal filings. This was his world, his arena. He was trying to drag me onto his home turf, where his money and connections gave him an insurmountable advantage. But then the rage returned, cold and clarifying. He thought this would break me. He thought I would come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, ready to take my seat at the kitchen table again. He had miscalculated. He didn't know the woman I had become in the last 3 hours. I didn't panic. I didn't call him or my mother to scream. I took a deep breath, walked over to the champagne bucket, and poured myself another glass. I sat down on the plush sofa, my phone in one hand, my drink in the other, and I started to think. The next morning I didn't call a lawyer. I called Mr. Abernathy. "I expected to hear from you, but not this soon," he said, his voice sharp and alert. I explained the situation, the cease and desist, the trademark claim. He was silent for a moment, and then he let out a low whistle. "He's not messing around. That's a nasty, brutish tactic. Expensive to fight." "I know," I said. "That's the point. But he's made a mistake. He thinks I'm going to fight him in court. I'm not." "Oh?" The interest in his voice was palpable. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to fight him in the press," I said. An hour later, I was sitting in the office of a woman Mr. Abernathy had recommended, a PR crisis manager named Helen Sharp. She was a formidable woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. I told her everything. Not just about the legal threat, but about the dinner. The years of being marginalized. The whole ugly story. I didn't hold anything back. She listened intently, taking no notes, her gaze never leaving my face. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "It's a David and Goliath story," she said. "A cruel, wealthy family trying to crush their talented, independent daughter who embarrassed them. The media will eat this up with a silver spoon. But are you prepared for that? Once this goes public, there's no going back. Your family laundry won't just be aired, it'll be broadcast on a jumbotron." "They declared war," I said, my voice firm. "They don't get to choose the battlefield." The plan Helen devised was brilliant in its simplicity. We wouldn't just respond, we would preempt. The first shot was an exclusive interview with a major online business journal, the kind that people like my father and Mr. Abernathy read every morning. The headline, which Helen wrote herself, was a work of art. The design, "Star behind Synapse's success is being sued," by her own father. The article was a sensation. It told my story, framed not as a tale of petty family squabbles, but as a struggle of a young, female entrepreneur against an old-money patriarch trying to stifle her success. It included a copy of the cease and desist letter, which looked utterly ridiculous next to quotes from Mr. Abernathy praising my vision and brilliance. We also leaked anonymously the bill from Letwell and the detail that the family table had excluded me. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for them. The story was picked up everywhere. It went from a business world curiosity to a viral human interest piece. My father, who had curated a public image as a philanthropic pillar of the community, was suddenly cast as a corporate bully and a heartless dad. Comment sections and social media threads were overwhelmingly on my side. The Dubois Family Foundation, his so-called charity, was investigated by journalists who found it had donated a grand total of $0 to any actual cause in the last 5 years. The pressure mounted. Sponsors of a charity gala my mother was chairing began pulling out. Members of their exclusive country club were suddenly too busy for golf with my father. Alex's law firm was getting calls. Their perfect curated world was catching fire, and I was the one holding the match. 2 days after the story broke, my phone rang. It was Alex. His voice was strained, exhausted. "Clara, you have to stop this. You're destroying us." "I'm not doing anything, Alex," I said calmly. "I just told the truth. Dad is the one who filed the lawsuit." "He'll drop it," he said quickly. "He'll drop it right now if you just issue a retraction. Say it was all a misunderstanding." "No," I said. "It was that simple. He doesn't get to start a war and then demand a ceasefire the moment he starts losing. I want a public apology. From all of you." He scoffed. "You know that will never happen." "Then I guess the lawsuit stands," I said, and hung up. The final blow came a week later. On the advice of Helen, I announced I was starting my own foundation, the Clara Dubois Initiative for Young Artists, dedicated to providing scholarships and grants for aspiring designers from underprivileged backgrounds who lacked the family support to pursue their dreams. And to kick it off, I was donating 20% of my company's substantial profits from the Synapse contract. It was the final, perfect checkmate. I had taken their weapon, the idea of a Dubois Foundation, and created a better, more authentic version of it. I was no longer just the victim. I was a philanthropist in my own right, turning my pain into a positive force. That evening my father called me. Not his lawyer, not my brother. Him. His voice was gravelly, defeated. "The lawsuit is being withdrawn," he said. No preamble, no greeting. "I know," I said. There was a long pause. I could hear his strained breathing on the other end of the line. "What do you want, Clara?" he asked, the words sounding like they were being ripped from his throat. I thought about all the things I could demand. An apology, groveling, money. But I realized I didn't need any of it anymore. The power they had over me was based on my need for their approval. Now that I didn't need it, they had nothing. "I don't want anything from you, Dad," I said, and the honesty of it surprised even me. "I just want you to leave me alone. I'm building my own life now, my own table, and you're not invited." I hung up the phone before he could respond. I stood in my office looking out at the city, the very same skyline I'd seen from the penthouse suite. It felt different now. It no longer looked like a glittering maze I was lost in, but a landscape of possibilities. I had faced them. I had fought them on my own terms, and I had won. Not just the battle, but the entire war for my own soul. The bill from L'Etoile had been $2,200. The cost of my freedom, I realized, was priceless.